The result now is that we are in an inflationary period that is painful. The basic point with inflation is that we have a holy mess that's come together to put us back into what's called stagflation. Higher prices, rising prices at a rapid pace, combined with an economy which is strong at the moment, but is absolutely going to slow down, maybe even have a hard landing. And worldwide we'll have more inflation and even another downturn. Europe probably is already in a downturn because of the war hitting Europe even harder. Well, I came into economics actually 42 years ago when I joined the faculty at Harvard University. My first book was called The Economics of Worldwide Stagflation. It was studying this kind of phenomenon. The 1970s was a period of war, the Yom Kippur War in Israel against its Arab neighbors, for example, the Arab oil embargo, which is not so different from what's happening now, a breakdown of monetary arrangements, which were then called the Bretton Woods system, because it was under the IMF that the US dollar played a particular role in international monetary affairs. So there was this incredible confluence of monetary, fiscal, geopolitical, and resource shocks that came together and produced a stagflation. So here we are again. We are in a stagflationary mode. Interestingly, the Federal Reserve really had pumped up the money supply for many, many years, and especially after COVID hit. In fact, in two phases, one after the 2008 Great Crunch, the financial crisis, and then again in 2020, even more remarkably in certain ways, the Fed pumped in money and nothing really happened on inflation except Bitcoin prices went up or stock market prices went up or some asset value prices went up, but prices in the street didn't seem to go up very much. And so there was the modern monetary theory, we could just print money to our heart's content. And as a monetary economist, I was scratching my head, frankly, saying, how could the money supply go up so much and not have inflation? Well, there is some mystery to that. There remains in disentangling all of this. But I would say the following. We've had a huge increase of the money supply by the Fed. We've had two huge supply shocks, COVID and the war. And the result now is that we are in an inflationary period that is painful and that is familiar in certain ways, more familiar perhaps than how macro looked 2 or 3 years ago. And what does all of this mean? It means, first of all, the world economy is unstable. That goes along with the war also. That goes along with the sanctions regime. That goes along with geopolitical tension. I don't like any of it because it makes everything much harder and it really hits poor countries very, very hard. So we're going to have a lot of debt crises coming up if we don't decisively take measures to head those off. Second, the inflation's likely to continue for a while because the underlying factors are not going to go away. Third, we need to sort out the basics. For me, the first basic is end this war. Second basic is end the taunting and the provocations of China, and some specific measures like the Trump tariffs that were put on Chinese goods that raised prices, by the way, but also created a trade war. Third, I've said now, I can't tell you how many decades, if we want to fund things to make our society decent, we have to raise taxes. You can't do it by printing money, and you can't do it just by debt. So this is a third point that becomes quite important. All really important good things, like decarbonizing the energy system, are affordable. By definition, we can't afford not to do them. We will completely wreck the planet. In fact, decarbonizing the energy system requires perhaps a percentage point, even arguably a little bit more than that, per year of GDP in incremental outlays maybe, okay, it could be even more than that on some accounts. That's absolutely affordable. But we should have a tax system that is compatible with our spending needs. There's a lot of saving, by the way, that we should be doing in this country. I testified in Congress recently on the fact that our healthcare costs are roughly twice what they should be. We spend 2 times more than our peer countries on hospitalization days, on procedures, on medicines and so forth, because we have a quite monopolized, privately owned healthcare system in this country, which has a lot of market power to jack up prices. All of this is to say the Build Back Better agenda is right, because those are about long-term structural changes. I argued, good, it's right, raise taxes to pay for them. That's the right way to do this. Whether we see another major piece of legislation in this country for years to come, I think is quite doubtful right now. We could be many years without a serious piece of legislation in this country, which is completely dreadful. And that's why being engaged in a war with all the things we need to do is just the cruelest, misguided misunderstanding about the role of politics imaginable. And I just am so disappointed in Biden and so disappointed in his mindset that he didn't understand that we need to rebuild the United States, cooperate with other countries, and use diplomacy to head off war, not just Stinger and Javelin weaponry to head off war. And I find it extremely disappointing that we are where we are, and very dangerous. No, we're definitely in rough waters. We're in a crisis. The crisis will get worse in the coming months, and it could get far worse. We're experiencing stagflation, meaning that there are rising prices at the same time that output is falling in many parts of the world. Europe is already in a downturn. The United States is entering a downturn. China is in some kind of economic downturn. So this is a global economic crisis. And so I regard the overall economic situation as bad as I've seen in decades, worse than in 2008. We're likely to experience some very significant shocks in the months ahead. Of course, the most crucial question is what happens to geopolitics? Does war spread? Does it intensify? Does it diminish? Is there a return to the negotiating table? Do the US and China come to blows which would disrupt global society? Do they find a way to talk with each other? These are the questions that we're facing right now. So if we go into this just with a naive financial squeeze right now, we'll end up with a lot of carnage, meaning a lot of countries in default, a lot of very high inflation rates. You look at a country like Turkey. Now, they have not managed their economy properly for years, but the inflation rate is reaching 100% per year right now. Argentina, the inflation rate is reaching 100%. There will be other countries experiencing this kind of runaway inflation. Maybe Ukraine is going to have a hyperinflation by the end of this crisis. Of course, we don't know. So central banks and their wisdom or lack of wisdom will determine a lot. In 2008, the Fed and the US Treasury stupidly drove Lehman Brothers into a bankruptcy one weekend in September 2008, and it cost the whole world trillions of dollars, that technical mistake that they made. And so when you're in a crisis, the first thing to say is these institutions are not so reliable. They're not so smart. They're not so foolproof that they necessarily avoid real damage. I'm basically saying don't print money. I've never believed in that because you just get high inflation, but rather let's get a financial solution that doesn't condemn the country to default or to bankruptcy or to extreme austerity.